So we can start with what people understand as being contrails, right? So pilots in school get taught that when a plane changes at altitude and the density of the air changes and the heat in the engines and the difference in temperature between the plane and the atmosphere creates condensation. And that condensation, as it comes off the plane at high altitude, freezes and crystallizes. And as the sun goes through that crystal, it's like little pieces of ice. It diffracts, and then you see this white cloud behind the plane. When we were children, we thought it was the exhaust of the planes, but in actuality, it was condensation trails. But the sun in the sky is very powerful, and then it melts these little crystals, and then it disappears. And that's why when I was a child, we'd see the planes go overhead, and the condensation trail would follow the plane for a while, but then it would disappear. So the plane would be traveling through the air, and the condensation trail would travel with the plane and dissipate, because it goes back to being humidity in the air, so it disappears. Chemtrails is different because there's chemicals being added to the atmosphere by some of these planes. So we know from conferences on geoengineering that they talk about the types of alloys that they could potentially add to modify the atmosphere, the climate. And we have on record environmental specialists who've measured what's coming out in the soil, because in California and Mount Shasta and these areas, they know where the water is coming from. Then all of a sudden they start discovering that there's aluminum oxides and barium in high concentrations that didn't exist previously. And they start looking for the source, and they pointed towards the sky. And then on top of that, today we have insiders who come out, military people who've put their whole lives on record, at risk of their lives, and coming forward and saying, yes, at our military bases we have massive quantities of aluminum oxide and barium and these chemicals, which people have been telling us have been sprayed by planes.
We got things coming from sky down, and it's a huge problem, because as it comes down, what happens is a couple of things. Is that it actually is in our air, we breathe it. And as we breathe it, it's actually going to go up through our nostrils, into our brain, easiest access to our brain frontal lobe. The contaminants that have been identified, which already have been mentioned, are aluminum. Aluminum is the #1 free radical generator to the brain to cause early apoptosis, which is early death of brain, and it begins to set off the scar tissue, which we call the amygdalin, which is part of the chemical matrix related to Alzheimer's.
So we've got this one subject called chemtrails, and when you talk to people about it, as we're talking about, when people don't have that information, they block it out. They say, this is conspiracy theory because I don't know this information and I haven't heard it in the news, because we're all programmed to take our information from the news. And then you say, well, if this is true what you're saying, and this is true, this data, what are the implications, right? That's the normal reaction. So that's why in my book, Wiki versus New World Order, chemtrails is one chapter, because it's a whole body of knowledge to understand how this could actually happen. Chemtrail program is interesting because of the unintended consequences. So today people get medicine all the time, and they think that our government agencies are responsible for looking at collateral effects or interconnected effects of medicine, and that's actually not true. So what you would think is that when they test a vaccine or something, they're going to test it in conjunction with other things that affect the human body, be it environmental or nutritious or other medicines. And sometimes your doctor will say, well, you can't take this medicine and this medicine because there's a negative effect. So you think in your mind, well, they obviously check for these things, but when you start digging into the CDC and all these different organizations, that only comes up when they've had court cases and they've found them out in a very bad way. This is the same type of thing where I guarantee you that the government hasn't gone and checked at the unintended consequences of seeding clouds with aluminum oxide and barium. And when Fukushima started coughing up radioactive dust into the sky, right? How does that combine with an aluminum oxide? Does it make it the radioactive material suspended in the air and travel farther? We have no idea. What does it do to the environment? you're spraying this on blanketing whole regions, and over time, these minute amounts, how does this affect plant life? How does this affect people's respiratory systems? How does it combine with an influenza that's running through the population as people are breathing aluminum oxide and barium in minute amounts potentially, but still over time these things build up in the body. Most metals do. So we're pretty certain that nobody's looked at this, and we don't know if they don't care. Maybe they know and they don't care, or maybe they just don't know and they don't care because they believe that their mission, and potentially they're being told that their mission is to keep us from suffering from global warming or something, and that we can't tell the population because the population can't handle this type of information. Some people in governments do that, and that's very dangerous. So there's unintended consequences to all science and all programs, and that's why normally you run it, you test it before deploying things at large. And this is obviously something where that hasn't happened, right? So also, one of the things I did with the book was in each chapter, such as the chapter on chemtrails, there's a corresponding website that goes with it, right? So when people read, you have the words of the author, and you can discount what the author says, like, who the hell am I, right? Who's this guy talking? It's one person. So that's why for each chapter of the book, there's a website where people can go for that chapter, and then you can see other people talking. You can see an actual military sergeant talk about how she discovered these chemicals on her base, how her background is in health and safety, and how she actually measured around the airports the chemtrail chemicals, the aluminum oxide and barium. You can see a colonel talking about the program. You can see businessmen talking about weather modification for business purposes in order to control crop prices and so forth. So it's a multimedia experience. The book and the website gives people different angles and different views, because sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. When you have a lot of pictures, well, then it helps support the words that are written in the book, right? So it's to help people get over that hump in terms of saying, hey, it's just this one person, Megan or Grant Elder, talking about this subject. They get to the website, they say, oh boy, this is a lot more in depth than just that.
Well, thank you, Grant Elder, for this interview.
Well, thank you very much, and it's very inspirational because a lot of people have been looking at this stuff for decades, and to have someone your age in school trying to educate her peers, that's the future. It's more children talking, because the people who are very old today, they can't be bothered facing this fight, so it's got to come from the younger generation, people like myself and yourself. So thank you.